Welcome, Nolan, Bitcoiner. Good morning. Um, so big weekend. We had a major uh, jury decision on Friday in America, the Kyle Rittenhouse case. So this isn't really a discussion about the Kyle Rittenhouse case per se. It's more a discussion about two important things that happened as a result. Um, a realization that I had on that first day, which is really important, I think. And I'm going to explain it to you. And it's about peer networks, peer-to-peer networks, and top-down networks, right? So the idea here is that peer networks, right? Peer networks are the foundation of the future, and a reason why you'd want to psychologically trade the fiat system and the world we currently live in, right? The world you measure your wealth by, US dollars, the world where we measure economic growth in government figures of GDP and central bank figures around the basket of goods that make up an economy. None of which I'm arguing against necessarily. I think these were all great metrics for a time, the time that we just ended. And so what this shows about is the psychology around dollars, the economy, and Bitcoin, right? We argue in the same way that Scott Adams does, that the economy is a psychology engine, right? It's not math. Even though you're dealing with numbers, it's not math, right? You're dealing with numbers, but it's not math. So it's about the psychological momentum behind that money, right? And what we're arguing here is that the US dollar is just flat from a momentum point of view and a life point of view and a vitality point of view, for the simple reason that in order to accumulate more, you've got to go into debt, or you've got to sort of play the system the way it's designed, and that system actually doesn't allow you to save money, right? It doesn't allow you to save money. It doesn't allow you to save money because inflation is targeted as a matter of policy, right? So what it's done is it's made savings, wealth accumulation, move into real estate, move into the stock market, right? And in the end, what you require to get a little bit ahead is sort of an IQ of at least 130 and a Wall Street Series 7 license, and then you've got to get exposure to the market, and you've got to buy ETFs, and you got to buy all these sort of inflation busting tools. Pretty normal for many Americans, right? Pretty normal for many Americans, but unfortunately not normal enough for all of them. And there's a sort of left behind aspect after all these years of policy favoring Wall Street investors and all these folks, homeowners, so that now we're in a situation where we basically got to increase the money supply again just to try to make sure everyone can eat, right? And that's that inflation piece that we're talking about today. So what we're arguing is that by bringing savings back as a low barrier to entry to deal with your money, you're actually going to change the psychology of consumption, of the economy in general. And that's Bitcoin. That's the Bitcoin standard, right? So what we're doing is we're trading the Bitcoin standard or the fiat standard for the Bitcoin standard, right? That's what this show is all about. And we give reasons why, right? We give those psychological reasons why, because what we say is you're in a relationship with the money, right? And we're about ending the relationship in the show. I think that's a better way, instead of like allocate a bit of money and buy something like Bitcoin, a little complicated, right? What we're looking at here is reasons for which you wouldn't believe in the future of the US dollar. I'm not talking about the future of America. I'm not talking about the future of Americans. Very bullish on those things, right? But the future of the US dollar, where I'm coming from, I see it. And, so in my background, I worked for a central bank. Well, not really. I worked for a federal government that had access to a central bank in the banking committee, and that was in Canada. So did not work for a central bank, but understood the policies, was very close to their work and all that stuff. And so, where I'm coming from is, they've basically, because of the system that exists today, very hard to save, very hard to get ahead unless you invest in, either some form of commodity that's going to go up, a stock that's going to go up, in this day and age, a cryptocurrency that's you got to play that game hard for a lot of people, or you got to buy a house, right? And so the system we're currently perpetuating, is what I'm arguing is relationships that aren't really doing it anymore. So here's the contrast today, and it's the peer network. And I had this idea when I saw the jury, right? The jury save Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Because the news wouldn't have done it. They're still claiming all kinds of things like he had a crossed with state lines with a gun, or what would happen with black people if the same thing if they were Kyle Rittenhouse, all these hypothetical things that I'm not following them, right? It just seems like cope. Now let me get this. I'm trying to get a piece of info that I kept here. Okay, got it. Okay. So when I saw the Kyle Rittenhouse case, right, something struck me. And that was that it's a peer network, right? It's a peer network. And a jury of our peers, right? A jury of people like us from all walks of life who are judging each individual action is probably the most important part of American democracy in the end, right? In the end, that's the conclusion I basically came to on Friday, because every other piece of the republic, as far as I can tell, is no longer serving its original intended for purpose, right? You've got, when I mentioned that central bank piece working for the Senate Banking Committee, of course they change the inflation metrics over time in order to suit their desired goals. The central banks always want 2% inflation. That's a matter of policy. Now, what happens is if they don't get it, they can actually change the math that measures inflation. Right? They can change the math that measures inflation. And so what's happened over the past, 30 years is they've pulled out important pieces of the formula used to measure inflation. So they've taken out housing costs, they've taken out a bunch of stuff, right? I don't know the exact mix anymore because it's different in the United States and Canada and all these places. But nevertheless, it doesn't measure them anymore. In the end, it becomes the price of a candy bar, more or less, right? And so my argument is the U.S. dollar's future is more or less what they asked for, right? The policymakers behind the U.S. dollar said we're going to do 2% inflation. Then they tricked out the numbers. The 2% inflation was really only measuring candy bars. And in the end, my argument is the U.S. dollar will be good for what they wanted. It'll be good for candy bars, UBI payments, so that folks can consume and not die, right? And there'll always be enough to eat. Now that's short term. And theoretically, in Bitcoin, moving to the standard, we're not going to need so much of this, last resort help, right? So whereas the Federal Reserve was once the lender of last resort to banks, commercial banks, perhaps in the short term, they're going to become the lender of last resort for people who are trying to buy that Domino's on layaway. Did you see that Domino's is on layaway now? Okay, that's the end of the road as far as fiat currencies are concerned, as far as I can tell. So this peer network piece, this is really important, right? Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Not saved by the media, not saved by institutions built to help him, right? Nobody in Congress, the actual president, the sitting president of the United States called him a white supremacist, right? I mean, he didn't really have too many folks on his side of influence within the institutions that perpetuate America at this point, so the media and Congress. However, an old institution that couldn't be ignored, the jury of his peers, saved him, right? And that struck me. And it reminded me that there are other peer networks. And so in this little diagram here, we've got eyeballs, right? These are the connections between all the different peers in the network. A jury is the same. And Bitcoin, of course, is the same. And I want to tell, this is an amazing anecdote. Let me find his name here. He just died, unfortunately. His name is Mircea Popescu. And he died as perhaps one of the only, had 1 million Bitcoins, over 1 million Bitcoins, died in a surfing accident this summer. Now, I knew him for one of the most amazing things I've ever heard anyone do. And he did this, I think, in like 2010, 2011. I mean, the earliest days of Bitcoin. before I knew about it, before really many people knew about it. And here's the thing. So Bitcoin, just like a jury of our peers, right? Bitcoin in the white paper and the person who created it called a P2P work for cash, right? What was the exact? Just want to get you the exact title again. Just because he does use the word peer, and I want to make sure I see it correctly, right? So, yeah. So Satoshi Nakamoto titled the white paper Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. But it's important to hear the peer-to-peer again, right? Just like a jury of our peers, Bitcoin is a P2P system. And this is the best way to actually understand Bitcoin, right? Every one of these eyeballs are sort of an equal entity. And I put this in the Senate report in 2015, and I continue to use it over the years as I've sort of evangelized Bitcoin and try to explain what's going on. I use the tree falling in the forest thought experiment. If a tree falls in the forest and a million cameras, a million computers with a camera all see those things happened, the tree fell, and then imagine they had a way of voting between them. What happened? Did you see what happened? Did you see all these eyeballs? Imagine these are all computers. Imagine the tree that fell in the forest. All the other trees have a camera on them. Now they all say, I saw that happen, I saw that happen, right? And the truth just becomes a vote between all of those people, right? A vote between all of those people means the tree fell. If one person lies, if one tree lies about the tree falling, that's okay. The system can handle a lie, right? It's fine. It's just one lie, one mistake. The fault tolerance of the system requires that over 50% lie, right? So you've got to convince half of those trees, over half of the trees, to tell a lie. Hard to do, right? Slow process. Similar to a jury of our peers, it's the same idea, right? There in the end are no murder laws. Those are just directions to a jury, right? The jury itself can say, those laws don't apply, right? Those laws don't apply. They really can. Juries themselves are almost autonomous discretion machines there as a bulwark against poorly written laws and circumstances that don't fit into a law. Of course, they've got to take the law in mind. That's why the judge gives them the instructions, right? But this is a uniquely American institution. Look at Australia today. There's no jury of peers around there. Canada, no jury. No way. We don't do those things. We have little juries every now and again, but nothing like the United States system. The Rittenhouse case certainly in Canada would not have been tried by a jury. A major difference in outcomes. Let's compare them to the US dollar top-down network, right? So we've already compared the FBI a little bit, but let's look further, right? Here everyone's got an eye, right? Everyone's got an eye on the ball. Everyone's got the capacity to see something with their eyes and relay it to the other peers. Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you that amazing story. Sorry, almost lost it. So this is one of those old. This is the one that Mr. Popescu did. So that's the story I wanted to tell. So the fellow who died with 1 million bitcoins surfing, right? So he believed that, like, I forget the exact version, but it was like the 2010 or 2011, maybe 2012 version of Bitcoin was the real one, right? He didn't want to hear about anything else, nothing else, right? Anything that came after was fake or stupid, or he didn't want to be a part of it, right? And of course, even at those early days, it was just a few engineers, and they were saying, Marcia, well, you can't do that. Like, you got to be involved. We got to upgrade the network. We got to do this. No, right? No. A very important line in the sand was drawn that day in Bitcoin that stays with it. One person said, I don't want to do this. You can't force me to update my app. You can't force me to get the new operating system. When they push that on you on your iPhone or whatever, get the new software update. Well, Bitcoin can't do that because every one of these little eyeballs has to agree to run it, or it won't happen, right? It's like it didn't happen. If they don't understand the rules by which they're judging if a tree falls in the forest, and then how do we decide between us if the tree fell and all that, right? That protocol, the order in which you decide if the tree fell, vote on it between the witnesses and all that stuff, that has to be what he said was backwards compatible. I don't want to change. So whatever you're changing, you still have to recognize my work in this forest to view what's going on, right? And so that stuck. To this day, Bitcoin is something called backwards compatible. It doesn't just fork into a new upgraded system, right? It cleverly and slowly forks into an upgraded system as long as everyone went before can still recognize a thing that happened on the network happening, right? So did the tree fall? They can all still observe that, right? There's some limitations about winning the new Bitcoin reward, how Bitcoin is mined and created into the system that they don't get anymore. But nevertheless, they can still tell the difference between true and false on the network, happened or didn't happen, right? And this fella helped create that, right? And what he believed back then, right? They call him the original toxic maximalist, right? So toxicity is a big thing in Bitcoin. They don't want to hear about other coins. They don't care about other cryptos. They put them all down. That's great for them. Quite supportive of that aspect of it. But they don't see anyone who isn't a peer in the network as an actual peer, right? This is not exactly democratic in that sense, which is fine, right? But it's the same way that lords in the British system were peers, right? A peer-to-peer network. Those were peers. Peerage. It's still called peerage when you inherit your lord role in England, right? It's a peerage, and your peers are the other lords, right? The people below the lords are not peers; they're just people below the lords, right? And this guy had that attitude, and he's not wrong, right? So Bitcoiners definitely do see peers as only other Bitcoiners, and in some cases, ones who only run nodes who are eyeballs in this network. And if you're not running an eyeball in the network, then you're just something else. But nevertheless, anyone can run this. That's a fundamental belief of Bitcoiners, that anyone in the world should and can have access to this. And there's nothing keeping anyone from it. You could be a murderer's row, and as long as you have an internet connection and any form of machine, you could be one of these eyes. It doesn't understand anything about you personally, just that you run this node and you're a peer through running the node and in the network, right? So peer networks. So this guy created that whole idea of what a real peer is, and the true nature of peers in the network, and the threshold of being a peer, right? Besides that sort of you're not a peer, you are a peer. Juries have the same idea, right? They're going to judge you if you're on that bench, if you're on that row, you're going to be looking at the other person and trying to put yourself in their shoes, right? Now the top-down networks, right? And now this is the case for the FBI. This is the case for much of the U.S. system, frankly. And let me just get this. So here you've got at the top of the hierarchy, right? The only eyes that matter, and that would matter in the judicial system. So that would be a judge in some cases. In the case of a juryless trial, it's the prosecutors, the FBI, the judge, all the folks involved in that, right? In the dollar system, it's literally the symbol of the dollar, right? You've seen the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid, but that is effectively a hierarchical meme, right? They're memeing this hierarchical system, and the dollar is that. Right, the dollar is predicated on this top-down network system, right? And so for our frame, what we're suggesting is, while there are places for top-down networks in the world, right? There are still places for top-down networks in the world. I'm not saying there's not going to be any more top-down networks, but for money and for the current troubles in the FBI, here's a reason to break up with the FBI today. I can't remember. I forget her name right now, and I don't know the details of the story because I don't consume too much news because of this piece, but I do pay special attention to the FBI's corruption is the wrong word, degradation, how rotten the FBI has become. And there's a lot of people who said, oh, when the FBI was going to go after school board mothers and all this stuff, or school, it went in the news, and a lot of conservatives, oh, Merrick Garland and the AG are going to use domestic terrorism laws to go after school boards and things like that because of the critical race theory debates, right? At first, I heard it. I said, that sounds like fake news. That sounds like, conservatives and right wing people getting a little up in arms. But it turns out, I was wrong. And the FBI really is using domestic terrorist tactics to go after mothers. So there's a mother, I think, in the Chicago-ish area. I don't know the details. My notes didn't print off the printer, so normally I'll have the notes. I normally do print them, but today it wasn't working. So this lady was arrested by like a SWAT team. They like ran into her place. So what she's done until now is she's flipped school boards to her point of view. She's a very effective political operator, right? So the FBI went in and smashed her door down, I guess arrested her. And the charges are like some kind of wire fraud, something, right? But again, this is that whole FBI and dollar system, right? You know how many people in the world can be arrested for wire fraud with a bit of tax stuff involved? I mean, literally everybody, right? If you're looking at the money and you're looking for those two charges, you can trump them up on anybody. It doesn't matter, right? Everyone's using the financial rails for money that otherwise, they're probably not being 100% honest on their IRS filings. I'd say, like, I'm just guessing. I'm not American, so I don't know. But my impression is it's pretty widespread. But if you can surveil the money, right, and the FBI also has that power, you've got yourself into a situation where you shouldn't expect to find justice. You should expect to find ladies who are politically effective, find themselves with weird charges that make no sense because they got to get rid of her, right? That's what I'm saying happened here. And that's why we're going to get rid of a lot of pieces that are top down as we switch our money, right? As we move towards a peer network, juries are really the thing that's going to secure America over this hump, right? Kyle Rittenhouse is an amazing version of that, right? But Bitcoin is going to complete the Kyle Rittenhouse jury political system infusion as it takes over in America, right? Bitcoin is the extension of juries to the economy and to political order. And that's why, right, it's a relationship with money. And that's why the old system will just perpetuate spying with the FBI on your money, and more people are going to go to jail for silly things, right? That's why Bitcoin is imperative. That's why it's not about trading dollars for Bitcoin. It's a psychology engine, right? It perpetuates consumption. It perpetuates all economic choices. And Bitcoin can help us individually make better economic choices that resemble the way a jury would function for justice versus the FBI today, right? So that's why we buy Bitcoin. That's why we dump the dollar. Thanks, everyone. Another episode coming tomorrow.